August 15th, 1945. The sky above Hiroshima is a muted blue, the air still heavy with the scent of smoke and ash. Streets are eerily quiet, buildings reduced to skeletal frames, and the distant moans of the wounded mingle with the soft rustle of wind through shattered trees. Women step cautiously over rubble, eyes wide, scanning the horizon for any sign of normalcy. Their hands clutch children, their hearts uncertain whether this is a moment of pause or another wave of danger. Then a distant hum rises, unfamiliar, yet hopeful. Tiny specks grow into the unmistakable shapes of transport planes, U.S. aircraft carrying supplies, medicine, and food. Relief, once a concept too distant to imagine, is now tangible in the sky above. Women stop, mouths open in disbelief, as parachutes descend slowly, bright against the gray landscape. Packages marked with aid symbols drift gently to the ground, promising life where devastation had reigned. The moment is surreal. Tears mix with astonishment, hands stretch instinctively to catch parcels, and for the first time in months, the fear that had dominated every heartbeat gives way. Just briefly, to hope, by mid-1945, Japan's cities were staggering under the cumulative weight of war. Firebombing campaigns had reduced entire districts to ash, leaving tens of thousands homeless and millions facing severe shortages of food, water, and medical care. Industrial production was collapsing, transport networks were disrupted, and civilian morale was at a breaking point. For Japanese women, daily life had become a series of careful calculations, rationing scarce resources, caring for injured family members, and navigating streets littered with debris and uncertainty. The air was thick with smoke, the ground scarred by destruction, and the constant threat of further attacks lingered in the back of every mind. The devastation was particularly acute in cities like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Tokyo. Firebombs and conventional attacks had already destroyed infrastructure critical to survival. Water systems, hospitals, and markets. Women, who had assumed primary responsibility for families in the absence of men conscripted into military service, faced extraordinary challenges. They scavenged for food, improvised shelters, and managed makeshift hospitals. In countless homes, mothers juggled caring for children, tending to the sick, and preserving what little was left of normalcy, all while bracing for additional attacks or shortages. Strategically, the United States recognized the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Japan even as the war approached its end. Following the surrender announcement in August 1945, relief operations were planned with military precision. Transport planes and naval vessels were tasked with delivering food, medicine, and medical personnel to the hardest-hit regions. The operation was not merely logistical, it was also psychological. Japanese civilians, accustomed to scarcity and fear, were being offered tangible assistance from a nation they had been taught to fear. The contrast was stark. Decades of militaristic propaganda had prepared them for enemies in the sky, yet now the same airspace brought sustenance and hope. The scale of planning was immense. Coordination between military and humanitarian units required precise timing and navigation, ensuring aid reached cities with the greatest need, while avoiding residual hazards from destroyed infrastructure. Packages were carefully calculated to provide balanced nutrition, medicines, and essential tools for recovery. Even the parachutes used for airdrops were selected to minimize damage upon landing, reflecting attention to detail that acknowledged both human vulnerability and logistical necessity. For Japanese women, the months leading up to relief arrivals were defined by survival. Markets were largely empty, cooking was improvised, and children were fed sparingly. Illness spread rapidly in overcrowded shelters and makeshift housing, compounding the stress of physical exhaustion with emotional strain. Every day required vigilance, rationing scarce food, avoiding unsafe areas, and maintaining hope for a reprieve that often seemed impossible. Mothers carried the added burden of shielding children from the full extent of destruction, softening explanations while ensuring survival. This period also underscored the duality of human experience in times of crisis. While destruction dominated the environment, communities adapted through networks of support and shared knowledge. Women emerged as the organizers of these networks, coordinating food distribution, child care, and medical care wherever possible. Their resilience was not merely a personal trait, but a social necessity, binding families and neighborhoods together in the face of overwhelming adversity. The arrival of Allied relief would not only provide sustenance, but also challenge deeply ingrained perceptions of the enemy. For women, the first sight of parachutes drifting with food and medicine was disorienting, almost impossible to reconcile with years of wartime indoctrination. Yet it was a moment pregnant with possibility, a tangible shift from fear to hope, from despair to action. The logistical brilliance of the operation, combined with the human capacity to endure and adapt, set the stage for a transformative chapter in Japanese civilian life. This growing tension between devastation and hope, fear and relief, frames the experiences that follow. The next section will delve into daily life for Japanese women in those final days of wartime struggle, highlighting the emotional and social conditions that made the arrival of aid so profoundly impactful. In the weeks following Japan's surrender announcement on August 15, 1945, daily life for Japanese women remained grueling. Cities were devastated, infrastructure crippled, and food scarce. Mothers and grandmothers navigated streets strewn with rubble, carrying children while scavenging for anything edible. Markets were empty or unreliable, forcing reliance on foraged vegetables, wild plants, or rationed rice. Cooking often occurred over makeshift stoves, smoke curling into the ruins of neighborhoods where buildings had been reduced to skeletal frames. Water was rationed, electricity intermittent, and hospitals overwhelmed with the injured or sick. Every small decision, how much rice to give a child, whether to venture outside for water, carried profound consequences. The psychological strain was equally immense. Constant fear, compounded by weeks of air raids and destruction, had created an almost instinctive hypervigilance. Women listened for distant sounds of aircraft, braced for aftershocks from explosions or collapsing buildings, and carried the emotional burden of keeping children calm. Community networks emerged as vital lifelines, often organized by women themselves. Shared kitchens, communal shelters, and informal childcare arrangements allowed survival to extend beyond individual households. Yet these networks could only stretch so far. Scarcity and trauma imposed hard limits. Despite exhaustion, women maintained the thread of resilience. Diaries, letters, and oral histories describe the quiet courage in performing daily tasks, caring for the elderly, comforting the sick, or simply ensuring that children slept safely amidst the wreckage. These acts, though uncelebrated at the time, were essential for sustaining families and neighborhoods. Mothers became not just caregivers but strategists, calculating risk, prioritizing resources, and making decisions that could determine life or death. The arrival of Allied relief, when it finally came, disrupted this fragile equilibrium. Cargo planes and parachuted supplies represented more than food or medicine. They were tangible proof that help was possible, that the long months of deprivation might end. For Japanese women, accustomed to scarcity and self-reliance, the sudden sight of parachutes drifting over streets or open fields elicited disbelief, wonder, and profound emotional release. Packages contained essentials: rice, canned goods, blankets, and medical supplies. The meticulous planning of delivery operations, timed for daylight visibility, mapped for safe landing zones, and coordinated to avoid residual hazards, ensured the maximum impact of aid. Women were often the first to respond. They guided children to secure areas to collect supplies, organized neighbors to retrieve packages efficiently, and began distributing resources to those too frail or injured to move. The practical skills honed through months of survival, navigating ruined neighborhoods, rationing limited resources, managing households under extreme stress, now enabled rapid and effective relief distribution. Their leadership transformed relief from an abstract concept into immediate life-saving action. Emotionally, the impact was immense. Tears, laughter, and astonishment coexisted as women realized that hope could arrive from the very skies that had once delivered fear. Their reactions reflected both disbelief and relief, a mixture of awe at the scale of aid and gratitude for the tangible improvement it promised. Children, often frightened or malnourished, experienced joy and surprise for the first time in months, amplifying the emotional resonance for mothers witnessing their happiness. This moment also initiated a broader social transformation. Communities began to reorganize around the distribution of aid, with women acting as coordinators, mediators, and protectors. Trust and cooperation, strained by scarcity and war, began to rebuild. The shared experience of relief created new bonds among neighbors and strengthened pre-existing networks that had been frayed by months of hardship. The juxtaposition of devastation and relief created a powerful narrative. Destruction had been nearly total, yet human resilience, coupled with deliberate humanitarian intervention, could restore not only basic sustenance, but also hope. Japanese women, central to both survival and recovery, became the key interpreters of this transformation, demonstrating courage, leadership, and emotional strength. This context, months of suffering immediately followed by the arrival of hope, sets the stage for understanding the multiple angles of the story. From technological precision in delivery to emotional responses and moral dimensions, the next section will explore these perspectives in detail. The delivery of relief to post-war Japan was a remarkable feat of coordination, combining military precision with humanitarian urgency. American transport aircraft, including the C-46 Commando and C-47 Skytrain, were deployed to carry tons of food, medicine, and supplies to devastated urban centers. Each flight was meticulously planned. Routes were charted to avoid remaining hazards, landing zones were selected for accessibility, and timing was synchronized to maximize safety and efficiency. This was not a mere logistical operation. It was a demonstration of how technology and planning could directly save lives in the aftermath of war. Airdrops, in particular, required exacting calculations. Parachutes were designed to soften the descent of packages, preventing breakage of fragile medical supplies or food containers. Pilots coordinated altitude, speed, and wind correction to ensure that each bundle reached its intended destination. Ground teams, often including Japanese volunteers, were briefed on where and how to retrieve supplies safely. The precision achieved reflected both advanced navigation technology and extensive training. Crews had to adapt constantly, adjusting for unpredictable weather, residual war damage on landing sites, and the varied geography of Japanese cities. Beyond aircraft, naval vessels played a complementary role. Cargo ships delivered bulk supplies to ports capable of functioning despite wartime damage, allowing relief to reach areas inaccessible by air. Coordinated convoys ensured that food, blankets, and medical equipment moved efficiently along reconstructed or partially cleared transport routes. This interplay of air and sea logistics exemplified a complex system where technology met human necessity, demonstrating that large-scale relief operations could be executed even in environments devastated by prolonged conflict. The U.S. military also implemented innovative methods to maximize efficiency. Packages were pre-sorted for nutritional content, prioritizing high-protein rations for children and vulnerable populations. Medicines were labeled with clear instructions, often using pictograms to overcome language barriers and ensure safe distribution. Pilots and logistical officers constantly communicated with relief coordinators, making real-time adjustments to account for on-the-ground conditions. This blend of planning, adaptation, and technological application made the deliveries more than mere transport. They became instruments of immediate survival. For Japanese women, the precision of these operations was invisible yet transformative. What they experienced was not the technical orchestration, but its effects. Parachutes descending slowly over open squares, crates deposited safely for collection, and supplies arriving without loss or contamination. The careful planning that allowed this success turned moments of fear into tangible relief. Children could eat, wounds could be treated, and a sense of possibility returned to neighborhoods that had known only destruction. The operations were also temporally coordinated to reinforce psychological impact. Daylight drops allowed civilians to see aid arriving, building trust and mitigating lingering fear from previous air raids. Routes were repeated to reach multiple districts efficiently, demonstrating both consistency and reliability. Each flight combined mechanical precision with human judgment, ensuring that the technology served its ultimate purpose: restoring life and hope. The integration of tactical expertise and technological innovation had broader implications as well. It demonstrated that post-war relief could leverage wartime capabilities without perpetuating destruction. The same principles used to coordinate complex air missions now delivered life instead of bombs. For Japanese women, accustomed to scarcity and improvisation, this was nothing short of astonishing. The meticulousness of the operation, the visible effectiveness of parachute drops, and the timely arrival of necessities transformed disbelief into awe. This tactical and technological success was inseparable from human response. Planning and machinery created the possibility, but women's participation, retrieving packages, organizing neighbors, and distributing resources translated potential into tangible survival. The interplay of engineering and human action turned a calculated operation into a deeply emotional experience, where hope could be grasped literally from the sky. The next section will explore the human and emotional angles. The astonishment, gratitude, and moral reflections experienced by Japanese women witnessing aid for the first time in months. For Japanese women, the arrival of American relief was a moment that defied belief. Months of fear, hunger, and exhaustion had conditioned them to expect only scarcity. Yet suddenly, parachutes drifted down from the sky, carrying sustenance and medicine. Mothers clutched children to their chests, shielding them from the debris-strewn streets, while simultaneously guiding them to packages that promised nourishment. Their astonishment was immediate and visceral, expressed in wide eyes, trembling hands, and whispered exclamations that mingled awe with relief. The psychological impact was profound. Women had endured prolonged stress, rationed what little food remained, and navigated a cityscape scarred by fire and destruction. Their daily reality was one of constant calculation. Which child to feed first? Which route was safest? How to improvise cooking and shelter? The sudden provision of aid disrupted this rhythm, replacing fear with a tangible form of hope. Relief was not abstract. It was rice for the starving, blankets for the cold, and medicine for the sick. Each package was a promise that survival was possible, that the endless grind of deprivation could end. Community dynamics shifted immediately. Women organized collection points, delegated distribution to neighbors, and ensured that those too frail to move received assistance. These acts required rapid decision-making and emotional composure under crowded, chaotic conditions. The communal response amplified the effect of the aid, transforming individual astonishment into collective relief. Observing neighbors receive packages safely created a ripple of trust and shared optimism, reinforcing bonds weakened by months of scarcity and fear. Emotionally, the impact was layered. Gratitude mingled with disbelief. Joy coexisted with lingering trauma. Women often express tears at seeing children finally fed or wounded neighbors receiving medicine. Their reactions were not mere sentimentality. They reflected the culmination of endurance, the recognition of life returning to a devastated environment. The moral dimension was also present. Many women felt a complex awareness of the forces that had caused their suffering, yet in that moment, the focus was on immediate survival and the miraculous presence of aid. Children responded instinctively, their joy amplifying women's emotional reactions. Laughter, previously rare in the ruins of cities, filled streets and shelters. Mothers watched as curiosity overcame caution, seeing the tangible benefits of parachutes and packages. The psychological relief was contagious. Adults and children alike found moments of normalcy in the midst of devastation. Women, as primary caregivers, became conduits for this restoration of hope, translating the arrival of supplies into structured care and reassurance for families. The moral and emotional resonance extended beyond individual households. Women often mediated distribution to ensure fairness, preventing conflict in communities strained by months of deprivation. These acts of leadership reinforced social cohesion, demonstrating that survival depended not only on receiving aid, but on organizing it effectively for the collective good. The arrival of relief thus became a test of resilience, cooperation, and compassion, highlighting women's central role in both household and community recovery. This human and emotional perspective underscores the deeper significance of tactical and technological operations. Precision and planning enabled survival, but it was the response of Japanese women that gave life to the deliveries. Their astonishment, gratitude, and careful stewardship transformed parachutes and crates into hope, sustenance, and moral renewal. The interplay of strategic planning with emotional reception illustrates the full spectrum of relief operations, where human resilience meets deliberate intervention. These experiences prepared the stage for the story's climax. The first large-scale relief deliveries that reshaped entire communities, creating moments of joy and astonishment that became historical turning points. The first large-scale relief operation to Japanese cities occurred in the final weeks of August 1945, mere days after the formal surrender. Hiroshima, still reeling from atomic devastation, became a focal point for the U.S. humanitarian effort. Transport planes, loaded with rice, medical supplies, blankets, and clothing, approached the city under careful coordination. For Japanese women, who had endured weeks of hunger, injury, and fear, the approach of Allied aircraft was surreal. The sky, once a harbinger of destruction, now carried life-saving provisions. Pilots executed precise airdrops, releasing parachuted packages over open squares, cleared fields, and the remnants of streets once crowded with buildings. Packages descended slowly, fluttering against the blue sky, and landed with soft thuds on scarred ground. Women and older children rushed to retrieve them, hands trembling, eyes wide, shouting in disbelief. Mothers balanced astonishment with practical urgency, guiding children to secure areas, sorting rations, and distributing supplies to neighbors. The moment crystallized a profound intersection of technology, planning, and human experience. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. Hundreds of tons of food and medicine were delivered within days, reaching the most devastated districts. Coordinated landing zones prevented overcrowding and injury, while clear visual markers helped civilians locate supplies efficiently. Japanese women, who had honed their survival skills over months of scarcity, immediately adapted. They organized collection points, ensured equitable distribution, and monitored supplies for the most vulnerable. Their leadership transformed the airdropped packages from mere objects into immediate lifelines, reinforcing the connection between strategic planning and human endurance. Emotionally, the scene was overwhelming. Women who had scavenged for scraps now held parcels of rice sufficient to feed entire families. Children, previously pale from malnutrition, pressed around mothers, eager to claim their share. Tears, laughter, and astonishment mingled in the streets and temporary shelters. The psychological relief was palpable, a sudden easing of constant tension, fear, and uncertainty. The sky that had once represented terror now symbolized hope, demonstrating how a shift in circumstance could redefine perception, even in a city scarred by catastrophic destruction. Leadership and coordination were critical to this turning point. U.S. officers and relief coordinators monitored each drop, ensuring maximum efficiency and minimal disruption. Ground teams, often assisted by Japanese volunteers, guided retrieval and distribution, preventing conflict and confusion. Women acted as the critical link, translating these logistical achievements into practical support for families and communities. Their ability to marshal resources, protect children, and maintain order amidst astonishment exemplified resilience under extreme conditions. The impact extended beyond the immediate provision of food and medicine. Communities began to regain a sense of structure and purpose. Where days before survival had been improvised, relief operations introduced predictability. Women, often the backbone of households and neighborhoods, leveraged this opportunity to restore routines, distribute responsibilities, and foster collective recovery. In effect, the delivery of aid initiated the first true phase of post-war reconstruction, empowering civilians to act as agents in their own survival. The operation also carried symbolic weight. For Japanese women, the sudden generosity of the former enemy challenged deeply ingrained perceptions. It was difficult to reconcile the months of propaganda and fear with the tangible care now arriving from above. Yet the transformation was undeniable. Astonishment evolved into action. Women organized distribution, ensured children received adequate nutrition, and maintained vigilance to maximize the benefit of every package. Their response transformed strategic aid into a lived reality of hope, bridging the gap between plan and impact. This first wave of large-scale deliveries marked a turning point not only in material terms, but also in psychological and social dimensions. The coordination, precision, and timing of the operation met the immediate needs of a city in ruin, while Japanese women's emotional, practical, and moral responses converted it into a catalyst for communal recovery. As the relief operations expanded, entire regions experienced the transformative impact of sustained aid. Cities like Nagasaki, Kobe, and parts of western Honshu became recipients of continuous deliveries, each flight reinforcing hope where despair had dominated. For Japanese women, these repeated interventions solidified the sense that survival was no longer a precarious gamble, but a tangible possibility. Mothers who had rationed scraps for weeks now had consistent access to rice, canned goods, and medical supplies, allowing families to regain stability. The cumulative effect of these operations was extraordinary. Parachuted packages arrived in staggered waves, ensuring that no single district faced overwhelming congestion. Women quickly developed systems for collection and redistribution. They designated retrieval teams, organized queues for children and the elderly, and coordinated with neighbors to prioritize the most vulnerable. Streets once dominated by rubble and fear became spaces of cautious optimism, where astonishment gradually gave way to pragmatic action. The efficiency of American planning met the resourcefulness of Japanese women, creating a dynamic interplay between strategy and human resilience. Emotionally, the transformation was profound. Relief deliveries evoked tears of gratitude, incredulity, and joy. Women observed children eating adequately for the first time in months, neighbors receiving blankets to survive cooler nights, and the sick obtaining essential medicines. Every successful drop reinforced communal bonds and shifted social dynamics. Women assumed leadership roles more visibly, not only within households, but in neighborhoods and temporary shelters, mediating distribution and ensuring fairness. Their participation amplified the psychological impact of the aid, translating hope from concept to lived reality. The technology and precision of the operation remained vital. Pilots adapted to weather changes, shifting winds, and damaged urban landscapes to ensure safe landings. Packages were carefully marked to facilitate rapid identification, and teams on the ground communicated adjustments to optimize distribution. Yet it was the human element, the vigilance, compassion, and organization of women that gave the deliveries meaning beyond mere sustenance. Each act of retrieval, sorting, and care transformed logistical success into emotional and social recovery. By late August and early September 1945, patterns of hope and relief were becoming embedded into daily life. Mothers who had once scavenged for scraps could plan meals, organize schooling for children, and tend to the sick with less fear. Neighborhoods began to reorganize around collection points and community kitchens, creating networks that sustained multiple families simultaneously. Women, already experienced in improvisation and care, became the linchpins of these efforts, ensuring that aid was equitably distributed and that children, elderly, and infirm were prioritized. The significance of these sustained operations extended beyond immediate survival. They represented a moral and psychological turning point. The war's destructive force, which had dominated women's lives for years, was now counterbalanced by acts of deliberate care. The astonishment felt at first parachute drop evolved into confidence that relief could be counted on, that survival was possible, and that communal recovery was within reach. This shift was visible not only in physical terms, fuller bellies, treated wounds, and restored neighborhoods, but also in the restoration of dignity, agency, and hope. In social terms, women's roles were elevated. Their leadership in distributing aid, organizing neighborhoods, and safeguarding children and vulnerable adults became central to post-war recovery. The psychological burden of fear and uncertainty, once omnipresent, eased as they witnessed tangible proof that human compassion, even from a former enemy, could reshape lives. Relief operations, in essence, validated the critical role of women as both caregivers and coordinators, highlighting resilience as a practical and moral force. This period of sustained aid marked the climax of the human experience in post-war Japan, a convergence of precise planning, technological execution, and emotional engagement that restored life and hope. Women's astonishment, once the response to a single parachute drop, became a profound, ongoing testament to resilience, leadership, and human adaptability. The scene of entire communities recovering amid devastated landscapes epitomized the transformative power of coordinated relief. The immediate aftermath of the relief operations revealed the profound impact of sustained aid on Japanese communities. Cities like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Kobe, once reduced to rubble and despair, began to show the first signs of recovery. Women, who had carried the heaviest burden of survival, found their labor rewarded with tangible results. Families fed, wounds treated, and neighborhoods reorganized. The practical effects of the aid were undeniable. Rice, canned goods, and essential medicines provided nutrition, alleviated illness, and restored a semblance of daily routine. Women emerged as the central actors in this recovery. Mothers organized distribution within households, ensuring equitable sharing among children and elderly relatives. In communal spaces, they coordinated neighbors, facilitated collection points, and monitored usage to prevent shortages or conflict. Their knowledge of local networks, combined with organizational skill honed under months of deprivation, turned relief packages into instruments of social stability. This was not merely survival, it was community reconstruction in miniature, driven largely by the emotional and practical labor of women. Health outcomes improved rapidly where aid arrived. Malnutrition among children declined, minor injuries could be treated effectively, and blankets and clothing mitigated exposure to disease and cold. Women often acted as first responders, administering basic care and coordinating with local health workers or volunteers. The presence of medical supplies enabled more structured treatment, allowing recovery from illnesses that had previously gone unattended due to scarcity or fear. Mothers' vigilance ensured that vulnerable family members benefited most, translating logistics into life-saving action. The psychological impact was equally transformative. Months of fear and deprivation had created chronic stress and anxiety. Relief operations alleviated not only hunger, but also the emotional weight of survival uncertainty. Women observed tangible signs of hope. Children's laughter returning, neighbors expressing gratitude, and communities regaining a rhythm interrupted by devastation. The repeated arrival of aid confirmed that survival was possible, restoring confidence that the destruction of war did not signal the permanent collapse of life or society. Community dynamics evolved in tandem with material recovery. Shared kitchens, temporary shelters, and organized distribution networks strengthened social cohesion. Women, by mediating equitable access and providing practical leadership, fostered trust among neighbors and reinforced cooperative networks. Their roles extended beyond individual households, embedding them as pivotal figures in post-war society. These efforts not only addressed immediate need, but also laid the groundwork for longer-term social reconstruction. The scale of improvement was evident in quantitative and qualitative measures. Reports from local authorities and international observers noted decreased malnutrition rates, stabilized neighborhoods, and improved morale among civilians. Diaries and oral histories highlighted the emotional relief experienced by women, the reassurance of seeing families nourished, and the empowerment that came from taking an active role in recovery. Women's management of aid operations transformed relief from mere material provision into structured, community-wide recovery. The operations also illuminated broader lessons about resilience, agency, and the human dimension of aid. Technology and logistics provided the means, but it was women's labor, vigilance, and decision-making that translated parachuted supplies into life-saving outcomes. Their ability to respond rapidly, organize neighbors, and maintain order exemplified a remarkable synergy between human resourcefulness and calculated intervention. As the immediate shock of devastation eased, Japanese women assumed increasingly visible roles in the ongoing process of rebuilding. Their leadership during relief operations demonstrated not only survival skills, but also strategic thinking, social cohesion, and moral guidance. These capacities would inform broader post-war reconstruction, influencing household, community, and societal recovery. In the weeks and months following the initial relief deliveries, the long-term effects on Japanese society became increasingly evident. Cities gradually regained functionality, neighborhoods re-established routines, and families could plan beyond mere survival. For Japanese women, the experience of managing relief operations solidified their roles as indispensable leaders within households and communities. Their responsibility extended from distributing food and medicine to organizing social cohesion, mediating disputes, and ensuring that the vulnerable, children, elderly, and sick received proper care. The cumulative effect of sustained aid transformed not only material conditions, but also social dynamics. Where fear and mistrust had dominated daily life, cooperation and hope began to emerge. Women organized communal kitchens, coordinated neighborhood watch systems, and maintained networks of support for those unable to participate directly. These structures persisted long after the immediate deliveries ended, creating resilient social networks that underpinned the broader reconstruction of urban centers. The skills honed during relief operations, organization, resource management, and negotiation carried over into post-war governance and civic life. Psychologically, the impact of relief was profound and lasting. Japanese women, once burdened by constant fear and deprivation, experienced renewed agency and confidence. Observing children nourished, sick neighbors receiving care, and families regaining stability reinforced a sense of purpose. Diaries and oral histories from the period highlight emotional responses ranging from incredulous joy to cautious optimism. Women's astonishment at the arrival of aid evolved into pride in their capacity to organize and sustain recovery efforts. The relief operations became both a practical and symbolic turning point, demonstrating that human resilience, coupled with structured intervention, could overcome extreme adversity. The operations also contributed to shifts in gender roles. Women had long managed households and survival strategies, but relief efforts amplified their authority in broader social and community contexts. By coordinating distribution, overseeing equitable access, and maintaining morale, they assumed leadership positions previously unrecognized. These experiences influenced post-war reconstruction, as women's organizational and managerial skills became central to the rebuilding of urban life, local governance, and social welfare systems. Their involvement highlighted the intersection of survival, civic responsibility, and moral stewardship in shaping resilient communities. Long-term historical memory of these events emphasized both human and technological achievements, strategic planning, precise aerial and naval deliveries, and effective coordination created conditions for survival. Yet it was the human response, particularly women's management and leadership, that ensured the success of relief. Communities remembered not only the tangible aid, but also the ways in which women transformed parachuted packages into structured care, social order, and renewed hope. This memory became part of Japan's broader post-war narrative, illustrating the interplay of external support and internal resilience. The aftermath also revealed the broader moral and philosophical implications of humanitarian intervention. Relief operations demonstrated that deliberate, well-coordinated assistance could alleviate suffering on an unprecedented scale, even in societies recently at war with the providers. For Japanese women, the experience underscored both the fragility and strength of human life. Devastation could arrive suddenly, yet survival, recovery, and hope could be restored through coordinated action, compassion, and leadership. As cities continued to recover, women remained central to both daily life and social reconstruction. Their leadership during the relief operations became a defining feature of post-war recovery, bridging the transition from immediate survival to long-term rebuilding. Communities gradually regained rhythm, children returned to rudimentary schooling, and households could plan for the future, all anchored by women's resilience and organizational capacity. The arrival of American relief over Japan was more than a logistical achievement. It was a profound human moment, experienced most vividly by women who had borne the weight of survival. After months of fear, deprivation, and uncertainty, the sight of parachutes drifting from the sky carrying food, medicine, and blankets transformed astonishment into hope. Mothers guided children, organized neighbors, and mediated distribution, turning material aid into both sustenance and social cohesion. Their leadership revealed the indispensable role of women in translating strategic operations into lived survival. The events highlight the intersection of technology, planning, and human resilience. Precision aerial drops, careful navigation, and logistical coordination created the possibility of survival. But it was women's response, their courage, organization, and compassion that made relief meaningful. The astonishment they felt was not passive. It catalyzed immediate action, community rebuilding, and the restoration of daily life. In witnessing and managing these deliveries, women became central actors in a historical turning point, demonstrating that human agency is essential in shaping the outcomes of even the most meticulously planned operations. Beyond the immediate practical effects, the relief operations carried profound moral and psychological significance. Fear gave way to optimism, despair to practical hope. Communities, guided by women's vigilance and care, regained structure, trust, and social cohesion. The events underscore a deeper truth about humanity. Even in the wake of destruction, compassion, coordination, and courage can restore life and dignity. Relief was not simply food or medicine. It was affirmation that survival, resilience, and human solidarity could endure in the face of devastation. Ultimately, the story of Japanese women witnessing aid from the sky offers enduring lessons. Technology and strategy can deliver solutions, but it is human action, empathy, and leadership that give them life. In a world scarred by conflict, the courage, adaptability, and moral fortitude of those who receive and manage relief remind us that hope is not delivered alone. It is cultivated, shared, and carried forward by human hands.